My name is Iskira Valeon, and the night my grandfather's will was read, my parents hugged me tighter than they ever had before. But here's what still keeps me awake. Why did their love begin only after they realized I was suddenly worth millions? And why, 3 days later, did they start asking questions about whether anyone would miss me? Grandfather Corveth Valeon raised me from the time I was 7 years old. My parents were always too busy with their lives to care about mine. They left me at his modest home and rarely looked back. Corveth didn't mind. He welcomed me with open arms and a quiet smile that made me feel safe for the first time. He taught me everything that mattered. Independence came first, how to think for myself and stand on my own feet. He showed me discipline through daily routines and expectations I had to meet. But most importantly, he taught me silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the power of watching and listening before speaking. We spent evenings in his library reading side by side. He never treated me like a child who needed constant entertainment. Instead, he treated me like someone worthy of knowledge and respect. Those years shaped who I became. Corveth wasn't just my grandfather. He was my father, my teacher, and my only real family. My parents, Naelor and Bryxa Valeon, only appeared when appearances mattered. Christmas, Thanksgiving, my birthday sometimes. They would arrive with expensive gifts I never asked for and smiles that disappeared the moment no one was watching. Corveth would greet them politely, offering tea and small talk. But I saw the way his jaw tightened when Bryxa commented on his outdated furniture, or when Naelor suggested he modernize his lifestyle. They treated him like a relic from another time. Useful for free childcare but not worth genuine respect. They never asked how I was doing in school. They never wanted to know about my friends or my dreams. Their visits felt like business meetings, brief, formal, and uncomfortable. I learned to expect nothing from them, which made it easier when they gave nothing. Corveth never spoke badly about them in front of me. But sometimes, late at night, I heard him on the phone with someone, his voice low and frustrated. I couldn't make out the words, but I understood the tone. Disappointment. Corveth lived modestly in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. His house was small but comfortable, filled with old books and simple furniture. Nothing about our life screamed wealth. We shopped at regular stores, ate home-cooked meals, and lived within careful budgets. But rumors followed him like shadows. Neighbors whispered about old money and investments from his younger days. Some said he came from a wealthy family but chose a simpler life. Others claimed he lost everything in bad business deals and was barely scraping by. My parents believed the latter. I heard them talking once during a rare visit about how Corveth was probably living off savings, and how there wouldn't be much left when he died. Naelor laughed and said the house might sell for something decent at least. They assumed everything would eventually come to them. After all, I was just a kid. What would I do with property or money? In their minds, Corveth's death would be a minor windfall. Enough to pay off some debts, maybe take a nice vacation. Nothing life-changing. They couldn't have been more wrong. Corveth died peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after my 21st birthday. The funeral was small and quiet, just the way he would have wanted. My parents attended, dressed in black, their faces arranged in appropriate grief. But their eyes kept darting around, calculating, measuring. 3 days later, we gathered in a private attorney's office for the will reading. The room smelled like leather and old paper. Naelor sat forward in his chair, fingers drumming on the armrest. Bryxa kept adjusting her necklace, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. The attorney, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression, opened a thick folder. She began reading in a clear, steady voice. Every property, every bank account, every investment portfolio, every asset Corveth owned, all left to Iskira Valeon. Me. My parents received nothing. Not a single penny. Not even a personal item. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bones. I sat frozen, barely breathing, while my parents' faces went through a rapid series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like rage before they caught themselves and smiled. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Nobody spoke. My parents sat in the front seats, rigid and silent, while I occupied the back, clutching my purse like a lifeline. I expected shouting, accusations, anger hot enough to burn. But there was nothing. Just smiles that didn't reach their eyes when they finally turned to look at me. Naelor's voice came out smooth and controlled when he said, Well, that was certainly unexpected. Bryxa nodded, her smile stretching wider. Your grandfather always did have a unique sense of humor. Her laugh sounded hollow, practiced. Wrong. They dropped me off at my apartment without another word. As I watched their car disappear down the street, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't over. Their calmness felt more dangerous than any explosion of anger would have been. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in the attorney's office. The way my mother's knuckles had turned white around her purse. The way my father's smile had frozen on his face like a mask. Something was coming. I just didn't know what yet. The next morning my phone rang before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Naelor's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. My brilliant daughter, he said, his voice warm and affectionate in a way I'd never heard before. Your mother and I were talking last night. We've been terrible parents, haven't we? We want to change that. Bryxa called an hour later, insisting on family dinners. We have so much catching up to do, she said. So many lost years to make up for. Her enthusiasm felt manufactured, like she was reading from a script. Over the next few days they showed up constantly. Surprise visits. Long phone calls. Invitations to lunch, dinner, coffee. They asked about my life with an intensity that felt suffocating. Every question, every gesture, every smile seemed rehearsed. Naelor started calling me sweetheart. Bryxa bought me flowers and expensive chocolates. They acted like loving parents in a movie, but their performance had too many cracks. I saw them exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Quick, meaningful looks that made my skin crawl. During one of their visits, Naelor casually asked where I kept important documents. You know, birth certificates, banking information, that sort of thing. Just in case of emergency. His smile was friendly, but his eyes were calculating. Bryxa wanted to know who advised me. Surely you're not handling all this alone? A financial advisor? A lawyer? Someone must be helping you navigate this inheritance. The questions kept coming, wrapped in concern and fake affection. Did I have a safe deposit box? Had I updated my own will yet? Was I close with any of Corveth's old friends or associates? It's so much responsibility for someone your age, Naelor said, shaking his head. Are you strong enough to manage everything alone? You don't have to, you know. Family is here to help. They wanted to know everything. My routines. My contacts. My support system. Each question felt like they were mapping out my life, looking for weak points. I answered vaguely, keeping details to myself, and watched their frustration grow behind forced smiles. I started documenting everything. Every visit, every phone call, every strange question. Something in my gut told me I would need this information later. 2 weeks after the will reading, Bryxa brought up a new idea over dinner at my apartment. Your father and I were thinking, she said, cutting her food with precise movements. You've been through so much with Corveth's death. You need time to grieve properly. Naelor jumped in, perfectly timed. We found this beautiful retreat property. Remote, peaceful, completely private. No distractions. No stress. Just family time to help you process everything. They had brochures ready. A cabin in the mountains, hours away from the nearest town. No cell signal. No internet. No staff or neighbors. Just us, they said, smiling their rehearsed smiles. We could spend a long weekend there, Bryxa continued. Really talk. Really connect. Get away from all this legal mess and just be a family for once. Everything about it felt wrong. The location was too isolated. The timing too convenient. The sudden interest in my emotional well-being too fake. But I kept my face neutral, pretending to consider their offer. Let me think about it, I said, and watched disappointment flicker across their faces before they hid it. They left soon after, but not before Bryxa squeezed my hand and whispered, Don't take too long, darling. We're leaving in 3 days. That night I couldn't shake the growing sense of danger. I went through Corveth's things again, boxes I'd been sorting through slowly. Most of it was ordinary, old clothes, books, photo albums. But in the back of his desk drawer, hidden behind a false panel I discovered by accident, I found a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in Corveth's distinctive handwriting. But the date made me freeze. It was written 3 years ago, long before he got sick. Long before anyone knew he would die. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was brief but clear, written in the same careful script I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists throughout my childhood. The paper felt heavy in my hands, heavier than it should have been. I read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper into my understanding. Corveth had known. Somehow he had known this would happen. I looked at the date again. 3 years ago. What had he seen back then? What had my parents done or said that made him write this warning and hide it away, knowing I would only find it after he was gone? The letter read, Iskira, if you're reading this, I'm gone and they're suddenly being kind to you. Don't believe it. If they are kind after I'm gone, it's because they want something. They'll smile and call you family, but they stopped being your family the day they left you on my doorstep. I've watched them my whole life. Naelor is my son, but he has his mother's greed and none of her conscience. Bryxa married him for money that didn't exist and has been angry about it ever since. Together they're dangerous in ways you need to understand. Trust the paper. Everything I've done is documented and protected. But trust no one else. Not friends of the family. Not distant relatives. Not people who claim to have your best interests at heart. There's one exception. Find Edriven Koss. They will tell you I betrayed him, but the truth is the opposite. He's the only person besides you I've trusted in 20 years. If you're in danger, go to him. The contact information is attached. Be smart, my girl. Be careful. And remember what I taught you about silence. The letter ended there, but a small business card was attached. Edriven Koss, attorney at law, with an address and phone number. I'd heard the name Edriven Koss exactly once before. 4 years ago, during a holiday dinner, Naelor had mentioned him in passing. Corveth's former partner, he'd said with a sneer. The man who betrayed the family and tried to steal from us. Bryxa had added her own commentary. Horrible person. Your grandfather was too kind to press charges, but we all know what Edriven did. Stealing client funds, manipulating accounts. Thank goodness Corveth cut ties when he did. They'd painted Edriven as a villain, someone to be avoided at all costs. And I'd believed them because I had no reason not to. Corveth never brought up the name, never contradicted their story. But now, holding this letter, I realized they'd lied. Corveth wouldn't send me to someone dangerous. You wouldn't trust a thief with my safety. Whatever happened between them, the truth was clearly the opposite of what my parents claimed. I studied the business card. The address was local, just across town. The phone number had a normal area code. Nothing about it seemed suspicious or hidden. Edriven was still practicing law, still accessible, still waiting. I wondered if he knew about the letter. If Corveth had told him he might hear from me someday. I called the number the next morning, my heart pounding. A professional voice answered on the second ring. Koss Legal Services. I need to speak with Edriven Koss, I said. My name is Iskira Valeon. There was a pause. Then, please hold. 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. Then a different voice came on the line. Older, careful, but not unkind. Ms. Valeon. I've been expecting your call for 3 years. We agreed to meet that afternoon at his office. I told no one where I was going. I took 3 different buses to make sure I wasn't followed. Something that felt paranoid until I actually spotted my father's car 2 blocks from my apartment. Edriven's office was small but organized. He was in his 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that reminded me of Corveth. When I walked in, he stood immediately and offered his hand. You look just like him, he said quietly. Same eyes. Same way of watching before speaking. He gestured to a chair. I assume you found his letter? I nodded and sat down. Tell me everything. And he did. Edriven explained that he and Corveth had been legal partners for 15 years. They'd built a successful practice together, handling estates and family law. Your grandfather was brilliant, he said. Fair, ethical, and absolutely ruthless when protecting his clients. 10 years ago, Naelor and Bryxa had tried to manipulate Corveth's finances. They'd forged documents, attempted to access his accounts, and even tried to convince him he was becoming senile and needed them to manage his money. Corveth discovered everything, Edriven continued. He came to me with the evidence. We could have pressed charges, but he didn't want the scandal. He just wanted to protect you. That's when Corveth changed his will, cutting out my parents entirely and leaving everything to me. But Naelor and Bryxa found out about our investigation. They couldn't stop the will change, so they spread lies instead. They told everyone I was stealing from Corveth, Edriven said, anger flickering across his face. They destroyed our partnership's reputation. We had to dissolve the business. I lost clients, contracts, everything. But Corveth made me promise to stay silent until after he died. Why? I asked. Because he knew they'd come after you eventually. And he wanted someone they didn't know about to have your back. Edriven pulled out a file folder thick with documents. There's something else you need to know. Something your parents definitely don't know. He opened the folder and showed me a specific clause in Corveth's will. I read it twice, then looked up at him in shock. An insurance clause, he explained. If you die under suspicious circumstances within 5 years of Corveth's death, the entire inheritance immediately goes to charity. Not to your parents. Not to any family member. To a list of organizations Corveth personally selected. The implications hit me like cold water. So if they try to, they get nothing, Edriven finished. Worse than nothing. They'll be investigated, suspected, and left with zero inheritance while the whole world watches their greed exposed. It was brilliant and terrifying at the same time. Corveth had built a trap. He'd made sure I was worth more to my parents alive than dead, at least for 5 years. But only if they knew about the clause. Do they know? I asked. Edriven shook his head. The clause wasn't mentioned in the will reading. It's in a separate document that only activates upon your death. They have no idea it exists. My hands went cold. Then they think they can... Yes, Edriven said grimly. They think time is on their side. I sat in Edriven's office trying to process everything. My parents didn't know about the insurance clause. They thought if something happened to me they would inherit everything as my next of kin. They had no idea Corveth had planned for this exact scenario. So they're operating on false assumptions, I said slowly. They think if I die they win. Edriven nodded. Exactly. And that makes them dangerous. Desperate people do desperate things, especially when millions of dollars are involved. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Iskira, I need you to understand something. Your parents aren't just greedy. According to what Corveth documented, they're capable of real harm. The forged documents, the manipulation attempts, the lies they spread about me, those aren't actions of ordinary people who want money. Those are actions of people who will destroy anyone in their way. I thought about the retreat they'd suggested. Remote. No signal. No witnesses. The pieces were falling into place in a way that made my stomach turn. What do? I asked. We document everything, Edriven said. Every conversation, every suggestion, every threat. And we wait for them to make a move. Wait. I said. You want me to just let them? I want you to be smart, he interrupted. Like Corveth taught you. That evening I went to my parents' house for dinner. They'd insisted and I'd agreed, playing the role of the grieving, overwhelmed granddaughter. I wore a listening device Edriven had given me, hidden in my necklace. Dinner was tense. They pushed food around their plates and kept glancing at each other. Finally, after the dishes were cleared, I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back I heard their voices from the kitchen. Low, urgent, angry. I stopped in the hallway, staying quiet like Corveth taught me. The retreat has to work, Bryxa hissed. We're running out of time. The creditors won't wait much longer. Naelor's voice was harsh. I know that. But we have to be careful. No witnesses. No evidence. Just an unfortunate accident in an isolated location. What about medical response time? Bryxa asked. If something happens and help arrives too quickly. That's why I chose that specific cabin. The nearest hospital is 2 hours away on winding mountain roads. Plenty of time for complications to become fatal. My blood turned to ice. They were planning my death. Actually planning it. With timelines and contingencies and backup plans. I forced myself to breathe normally, to walk back to the dining room with a calm face. They smiled when I returned. I left my parents' house that night and drove straight to Edriven's office. He listened to the recording twice, his expression growing darker. This is enough, he said. We can go to the police right now. But I shook my head. They haven't actually done anything yet. It's just a conversation. Their lawyers could argue they were venting, or I misunderstood, or the recording is fake. Edriven frowned but nodded. So what do you want to do? I thought about Corveth and everything he'd taught me. About watching, listening, and timing. I'll accept their retreat invitation, I said. But I won't actually go where they think I'm going. Over the next 2 days we built a careful plan. I would tell my parents I'd agreed to the retreat. I would pack my bags and leave my apartment at the scheduled time. But instead of driving to the mountain cabin, I would go to a hotel Edriven had arranged under a fake name. Meanwhile, I would leave behind evidence. Copies of the recording. A signed affidavit detailing everything I suspected. Documentation of every strange question and uncomfortable moment. All of it sealed and ready to be delivered to authorities if something happened to me. But nothing will happen, I said. Because I won't be there. The night before the supposed retreat, I made my preparations. I called my parents and confirmed I'd be ready at 6 in the morning. Bryxa sounded relieved. Naelor sounded eager. Then I contacted a lawyer friend of Edriven's who worked in the prosecutor's office. We arranged for her to receive a package at exactly 7 in the morning, 1 hour after I was supposed to leave with my parents. The package contained everything. The recordings of their conversations. Copies of the forged documents from 10 years ago that Corveth had saved. My written testimony about their suspicious behavior since the will reading. And most importantly, a detailed description of their plan for the retreat, including the isolated location and the 2-hour distance to the nearest hospital. I also included copies of messages I'd sent to 3 trusted friends, telling them where I was supposedly going and saying that if they didn't hear from me by Sunday night, they should contact police immediately. At midnight, I made an anonymous call to a tip line, giving them my parents' names and suggesting they look into financial crimes and potential endangerment charges. I kept it vague enough to seem like a concerned citizen, not like someone involved. Everything was in place. Now I just had to disappear. At 5 in the morning, I loaded my car with luggage. Real luggage in case anyone was watching. Then I drove toward the highway, taking the route toward the mountains. Halfway there, I pulled into a rest stop. I changed clothes, switched my luggage to a car Edriven had rented for me, and drove in the opposite direction toward the hotel. My parents showed up at my apartment at exactly 6. When I didn't answer, they used the spare key I'd stupidly given them weeks ago. They found the place empty, my bed made, and a note on the kitchen counter saying I'd decided to drive up early to enjoy the sunrise. I know this because I had a friend watching the building. She texted me updates in real time. By 7, the prosecutor had received my package. By 8, my parents were calling my phone frantically. I didn't answer. By 9, they realized something was wrong. I wasn't at the cabin. I wasn't answering calls. And they had no idea where I actually was. According to my friend, they left my apartment at 9:30, moving fast, their faces pale with panic. They drove toward the mountains, probably hoping to find me on the road or already at the cabin. But I was nowhere near the mountains. I was safe, hidden and waiting. The prosecutor moved faster than I expected. By noon, police had contacted my parents for questioning. They found them at a gas station near the mountain cabin, still looking for me. The questioning was polite at first. Just routine inquiries about a potential concern raised by an anonymous tip. But my parents' story had holes. They claimed they were just taking a family trip, but couldn't explain why they'd broken into my apartment or why they'd been asking so many suspicious questions about my finances. When police mentioned they had recordings and documentation, Naelor tried to leave. That's when they were detained. Not arrested. Not yet. Just detained for further questioning. But it was enough. They were separated and interviewed individually. Bryxa cracked first. She tried to spin the story as Naelor's idea, claimed she was just going along with it, said they never actually planned to hurt me. But the recordings told a different story. The words "unfortunate accident" and "no witnesses" couldn't be explained away. By evening they were formally arrested. Conspiracy to commit murder. Financial fraud related to the forged documents from 10 years ago. Breaking and entering. The charges kept adding up. They were handcuffed and taken to separate holding cells. No headlines yet. No media circus. Just quiet justice. The next morning, Edriven called me at the hotel. "There's something else," he said. "Another document Corveth left. It activates now that your parents have been arrested." He came to the hotel with a sealed envelope marked "Secondary Will," to be opened upon legal action against Naelor and Bryxa Valeon. Inside was a brief document, signed and notarized 5 years ago. It officially and legally disinherited my parents, removing them from any line of succession to Corveth's estate. It explained in clear legal language that they had attempted financial manipulation and were therefore barred from any inheritance, even indirectly through me. But more importantly, It included a personal letter to the court. In it, Corveth detailed every instance of their greed, manipulation, and cruelty. He explained why he'd removed them from his life. He documented their abandonment of me as a child and their continued exploitation attempts over the years. It was damning and thorough. The kind of testimony that would destroy any sympathy they might have received. He thought of everything, I whispered. Edriven nodded. He spent 5 years building an invisible fortress around you. Every document, every clause, every hidden letter. All of it designed to protect you from them. I cried then. Not from fear or relief but from grief. Corveth had known this would happen. He'd seen it coming years in advance and had quietly, carefully, built my safety net while I was completely unaware. The case became public knowledge within days. A journalist picked up the story from court records and suddenly it was everywhere. Parents arrested for plotting daughter's murder over inheritance made headlines across multiple news sites. The public reaction was swift and brutal. People found my parents' social media accounts and flooded them with angry comments. Old acquaintances came forward with stories of Naelor and Bryxa's entitled behavior, their constant complaints about money, their obvious resentment toward Corveth. Any sympathy they might have garnered as grieving family members evaporated instantly. Instead, they became examples of greed and cruelty. People shared the story with disgust, turning them into cautionary tales. Their reputations collapsed completely. Naelor lost his job. Bryxa's friends stopped answering her calls. Even distant relatives publicly distanced themselves from the situation. I watched it all from my hotel room, feeling strangely numb. These were my parents. I should have felt something, anger, satisfaction, sadness. But instead I just felt empty. Edriven visited regularly, making sure I was eating and sleeping. You're in shock, he explained gently. It's normal. Give yourself time. But time felt strange and slow. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold on a screen. With my parents facing criminal charges and no possibility of accessing Corveth's estate, Edriven helped me secure everything properly. We placed all assets in a protected trust with him as the executor, exactly as Corveth had intended. The trust was structured carefully. I would receive a monthly allowance sufficient for living expenses, education, and reasonable purchases. But I couldn't sell major assets or make large withdrawals without Edriven's approval. Not because Corveth didn't trust me, but because he wanted to protect me from making rash decisions during grief or stress. You're 21, Edriven explained. Corveth knew that's young to suddenly have millions. This structure gives you freedom without the pressure of managing everything alone. The trust would fully transfer to my control when I turned 25, or earlier if I completed certain education requirements Corveth had specified. It was practical and protective without being controlling. We also set up legal barriers preventing my parents from ever contacting me again. Restraining orders, no contact clauses in any future plea agreements, automatic legal responses to any attempted communication. I was finally completely safe from them. But safety felt lonely. The people who should have loved me had tried to kill me. And the person who did love me was gone. 6 months later, with the criminal trial behind me and my parents serving prison sentences, I made a decision. I sold the family estate, the house where I'd grown up, where Corveth had raised me, where I'd felt both loved and abandoned. The buyer was a young family with 3 kids. They walked through the rooms with excitement and plans, talking about paint colors and furniture arrangements. I watched them and felt something close to peace. The house would be filled with life again, with real family warmth instead of the pretend version my parents had performed. I used part of the money to establish a scholarship fund in Corveth's name. It would help kids who'd been abandoned or neglected by their parents, giving them opportunities for education and independence. Everything Corveth had given me I wanted to give others. The rest of the inheritance stayed in the trust, growing and secure. I went back to school, finished my degree, and started building a life that felt entirely my own. I left the city quietly one Tuesday morning. No announcements. No goodbyes. Just me, a packed car, and a destination I hadn't decided on yet. I drove with the windows down, music playing, feeling lighter than I had in months. I think about Corveth often now. About the quiet way he loved me, the careful way he protected me, and the wisdom he passed on without me even realizing I was learning. He didn't just leave me money. He left me the truth, About who my parents really were, about my own strength, and about the importance of silence, observation, and careful planning. The inheritance changed my life, but not in the way anyone expected. Yes, I'm financially secure. Yes, I have opportunities most people only dream about. But the real gift was understanding that love isn't loud or showy. It's quiet and careful and thinks decades ahead. My parents taught me what love isn't. Corveth taught me what it is. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he hadn't planned so carefully. If he hadn't left those letters and clauses and legal protections. Would my parents have succeeded? Would I be gone, and would they be living off my inheritance, smiling their fake smiles? But he did plan. And I'm here. And they're not. I learned the most dangerous inheritance isn't money. It's being worth more dead than alive. And the most powerful inheritance isn't wealth. It's being loved enough that someone builds your safety net years before you need it. My grandfather didn't just leave me everything. He left me the truth. And sometimes that's the most valuable thing anyone can inherit.